Hello, my name is Robert Carrillo. I am the host of the Cancer Doctor podcast, and today our in-studio guest is Dr. Rhett Bergeron, medical doctor at the Real Health Medical Center with offices in Roswell and Stockbridge, Georgia. Dr. Bergeron has over 25 years of experience as an integrative and functional health practitioner. He received his medical education at Louisiana State University Medical School, which is located in New Orleans, Louisiana. And after graduation, he completed an internship in pediatrics and internal medicine at the Charity Hospital System of Louisiana. He finished his family medicine residency at Earl K. Long Medical Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Dr. Bergeron has also worked with Immunocomp Research Laboratory, where he studied the immune system in chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and in cancer patients. Dr. Bergeron has trained and practiced in areas of environmental, biological, functional, metabolic medicine, and he has significant experience in metabolic immune therapies for cancer patients. Dr. Bergeron, thank you. Thanks a million for coming into the studio today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and it is quite my privilege to be with you.
All right. So the first thing that I think about when I read some of your bio, when you did your internship in pediatrics and internal medicine, how do you go to that, from that to integrative cancer care? How does that happen for someone like yourself? It just seems like a night and day switch to me.
Well, that seems like a very natural question. I would say that when I went to medical school, I didn't have any idea of what functional or nutritional metabolic medicine was. Mm-hmm. But after 2 years of medical school, I was having a struggle. I knew that there was something missing to what we were being taught. Mm-hmm. And I became sort of frustrated and disenchanted and spent the summer after my second year of med school with different physicians in their offices and in surgery. And I didn't see a compassion that I was hoping to see. Mm. It seemed sort of a remote system of just repeat this, repeat that. Mm. And there wasn't much of discussion of healing or restoring the body. So in my sort of despair, I prayed and I said, Lord, you've got to show me. Mm. I can't continue in this, because at the end of your second year of med school, generally you're in pharmacology. And I walked away thinking, I'm just going to be a high-paid drug salesman. Mm. And I'm just going to add drugs and drugs and drugs, pharmaceutical prescriptions to every condition that walks in. And it just didn't seem like I was going to be able to be a healer. And that sort of troubled me. And that's shortly after is when I prayed to the Lord, help me. Show me. Mm-hmm. And of course, he does do that. And not too much longer afterwards, someone from my church shared with me some cassette tapes back in those days of, health and wellness. And it was they were done by Dr. Joel Robbins from Oklahoma. And he was a chiropractor and medical doctor and naturopathic doctor. Okay. And so it quickly opened my eyes. And then during my third year of med school, I began to search out physicians in the Baton Rouge and New Orleans area that understood these things. And I began to rotate with them during med school and did some of my rotations. And during my internship and residency, I also spent time with them. And at the end of med school, I went to my first alternative medical conference, and it was with the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. And it opened my eyes, and literally by the time while I was in residency, I knew that my future was in metabolic, functional, restorative medicine. And so when I finished my residency, the staff at Earl K. Long Medical Center said, well, what's your practice going to be like? What's your future look like? I said, well, I want to use the basic principles of nutrition, responsibility, lifestyle, and detoxification to restore health, have a family practice, deliver babies, treat and prevent cancer, and then have a highly motivated clientele who's willing who recognizes the value of the therapy, who's going to pay for it as responsible patients, and I'm not going to be a part of the insurance system. And they looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah.
And so at the end of, and interesting, also at the end of med school is when I became really interested in the work of cancer. And I read a book called A World Without Cancer. I forget the author's name, but he's quite popular. But it just stuck to my soul, and that was always a challenge that I wanted to work with.
Right.
And then right after I finished my residency, I met an individual who worked for a Immunocomp laboratory, and they needed a medical director. They had moved from Dr. James McCoy used to work for the National Cancer Institute. He's a PhD researcher, and he decided to get out of the government field and go into the private sector. He partnered with a surgeon in Baton Rouge, and that partnership didn't quite last too long. And so when I heard of the work they were doing based in just basic immunology, looking at the strength or the functionality of the system, and how to improve that with low-dose immune hormones such as interleukin-2 and GM-CSF. And then they would combine that with tumor antigens, small proteins from the surfaces of cancer cells, and make that into a personalized cancer vaccine or immunotherapy. So in 1997, that's when I began working in the field of cancer. And so that's how I got my start.
In 87, you said, or
1997.
97. Okay. Wow. Fascinating. So I have a question. You mentioned the term metabolic, and our audience, a lot of them obviously are patients that have a cancer diagnosis. When we talk about metabolic health for a cancer patient, or I guess for anyone for that matter, could you break that down to us just as lay people? When we hear the term metabolic, what does that mean exactly? Biologically, what are you saying to us when you say metabolic, right?
So a common analogy might be how does the engine run?
Okay.
We think about exhaust and getting our emissions checked and having, the right gasoline, rating in the engine, and having a clean filter and all those types of things. So metabolic medicine is looking at on a cellular level, and what does it take for that cell to be optimal? And starting from the outside of the cell membrane and working inside to the different intracellular parts or organelles, such as the mitochondria, the nucleus, the cytosomes or peroxisomes. And so understanding how each one of those was designed and how it functions and what it needs to function optimally. And metabolic medicine will assess a patient and on a cellular level, if possible, and I break it down into two aspects to be overly simplified. One is, what does the cell need? Or you might say, what is missing that would raise the function? And then the second side of the coin is, what's there that might be blocking the cell or interfering? Or in other words, what's a toxin? And so on a physical level, molecular level, we could say those are the two basic aspects of metabolism. What do we need to optimize the cell, and what's there that needs to be removed or displaced or detoxified?
You use the analogy of an automobile, right? Having the correct gas, making sure the filter's clean. When I think of an automobile, I think about power. If we're talking about a cell and the metabolic health of the cell, are we talking about power in the cell? Are we talking about energy? Like, is that the need of the cell, like to have optimal energy?
Yes, a cell internally produces ATP, energy in the form of a biochemical called ATP.
Okay.
But the purpose of the energy is for the cell to carry out its function.
Okay.
So whether it's a muscle or a nerve cell or an endocrine cell, it will function in the way that it was designed. And so we want to restore optimal function, and not just on a cellular level, but in every cell of the body, every tissue of the body, because it works together as one unit.
Okay, so then if I'm following, does low energy in a cell, does that translate then possibly or probably to cancer?
It can.
It can.
It can.
Okay.
If every cell of the body has an electrical charge on its membrane,
Okay.
and the cell is an energetic or a bioenergetic, not creature, but an entity. It's biomolecular. It's full of atoms and electrons and proteins and enzymes, but each one of those has an electrical charge. That's the biophysics of God's creation in every cell. And so if a cell membrane has a reduced level of energy, it's going to have poor function. It's too sluggish. And the same thing is true of the immune system. If the cells of the body, and it may not be equally affected, different parts of the body can have different levels of energy, but if you feel weak or fatigued, your immune system feels weak and fatigued. It's not going to be able to do two things. It can't recognize old cells and abnormal cells, such as cancer cells, and work against them. And then secondly, the immune system will not be able to recognize infections, such as viruses and intracellular organisms, such as mycoplasma and spirochetes and parasites, things that can be a part of triggering cancer.
Wow. Okay. Fascinating. How many cells do we have in the body approximately?
Well, there's different estimates that are given, but let's say 50 to 100 trillion is a general.
50 to 100 trillion. So
and 1 trillion of those are immune cells.
1 trillion are immune cells.
Are immune cells. So God's given us an army of cells that act as both for defense, but also for attack. And it's a very important system at protecting our health.
There's so many cells. That's a lot of cells. So is there kind of like, again, I'm just asking as a layperson, if 5% of the cells have low energy, is that okay? Like, in other words, like we can get by, that's not a problem. We could sacrifice 5% of the cells. Or is it, no, that's too much. We do not need 5% of our trillion cells compromised, right? With low energy. I think about it that way. Like, what is the breaking point, I guess, is what I'm asking, right? At what point is like, hey, wait a second, we need to take care of these cells, right? Because you have me thinking at a cell level now, right?
Well, I think it's difficult just to look at if 5% weakness of our cells is probably not enough to result in major health issues.
Okay.
And there's too many other factors. For example, what are your genetic weaknesses that you were born with? Certain pathways that may not be efficient. Are there certain toxins from your environment? Do you have certain deficiencies? All those things factor together. I don't think we can just look at one parameter, such as only 5% weakness of energy.
Okay. So in the case of cancer patients that have a diagnosis, definitely at a cellular level, they've been compromised on the energy side to some extent.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement?
They're compromised from an energy standpoint, but also, again, there are likely some aspects of vital essential nutrients that are low, not equally low. And then I think there are also toxic triggers, whether they're environmental chemicals or infections that have, the body's about balance. We have a microbiome everywhere in our body, not just in the GI tract, not just in our mouth. There's a microbiome in every tissue of the body. And so it's about balance.
Okay. Now, you're an integrative physician and you've been helping patients with cancer for over 20 years now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when a patient is metabolically compromised, they have a diagnosis of cancer, what do you do or what do you attempt to do to help them metabolically in that way as far as the energy of the cell? What are you doing? I mean, how do you improve that, I guess, is my question.
Well, likely the first step is to correct their nutrient intake, first and foremost through dietary changes. Make sure it's not processed food, living food, real food.
Okay.
Doesn't have to necessarily be raw, but real food. And then of course we try to encourage clients to be careful on how that food is prepared. Okay. You can overly cook it and you can damage it. So we start with dietary modification with real food. We then also try to be careful about certain types of food. There are certain foods that tend to be more problematic from an allergy standpoint. They can actually bring on fatigue. It's not uncommon for someone to say, well, I eat this food and I become fatigued or I get brain fog. So we want to, part of it is an elimination diet. We try to determine what foods they're sensitive or reactive to, or maybe we could use the word allergic to, and they bring down their energy. And not only do they bring down the energy, but they alarm the body. There's a stress reaction. So their adrenal, sympathetic, and immune systems are sort of alarmed or activated. So that's taking away vitality from the body or energy. And so after we firstly deal with diet, then we try to ask the question, well, what essential nutrients are they low in? And we'll look at vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, antioxidants. And then thirdly, we try to ask the question, well, what's blocking their system? What's in their system that may be toxic? That maybe we could call it toxic sludge. It will block enzyme pathways, or maybe it will affect your DNA and cause changes in how it's expressed, and maybe turn on cancer genes. It'll turn off cancer protective genes and affect other pathways. So basically it's the epigenetics affecting the genetics.
Okay. For the layperson, epigenetics, give us just a...
Epigenetics is what is outside of your genes, what you experience in life, not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, relationally, socially, and what you experience in the environment as far as physical, water, toxins, nutrients, everything in life outside of your genes is the epigenetics.
Okay. Got it. It's what's happening to me and how my body's interpreting it all.
Yes.
Okay. So you started off by talking about, nutrition, food, and you address that first with the patients or clients, in your case, as you call them. So, we've heard the saying before that we are what we eat, but it sounds like to me that there's a significant emphasis placed on this in your practice, that we have to clean up what we're eating. Why is food that important? People go eat fast food every day. I was recently telling someone else, another doctor that I had read something here in the last year. I believe it's 80 million Americans eat fast food every day in the United States. 80 million. I couldn't believe it because I don't go eat fast food every day. But why is food playing such a significant role at a cellular level? What is it about food that makes up who we are, I guess, is my question.
I might answer that by saying there's two aspects or components of food that's vital to our health and living. One is food provides the structure of our cells and body. And food provides the raw materials for our energy. So the raw materials for our structure, our muscles, bones, our connective tissue, our cell membranes. And then once you have everything in place in the right structure, you have to have the right fuel and the right biochemicals. Food supplies much of that.
Wow. Okay.
So it's essential. You are, in a sense, what you eat, or you're going to become what you eat.
Okay.
If you're putting in toxic food and damaged essential fatty acids, your body's going to incorporate those, and your cells eventually will not function well. They will malfunction, and you will lose energy. You will have a decreased immune function. Your even your nervous system will be imbalanced. So there'll be often an excessiveness of the sympathetic side of our alarm side of the system, and that keeps us in constant tension.
Oh, wow. So you said sympathetic side, which has to do with the autonomic nervous system, right?
Yes.
So a food can influence the sympathetic system.
Yes. For example, again, earlier I mentioned if you're reacting to a food, that's an alarm. So your sympathetic nervous system is constantly being triggered. And for example, things such as coffee. Nothing wrong with coffee in moderation, but some people consume too much coffee, and some people are actually become reactive to caffeine. And so it's 10 times stronger on their body. They may not always sense it or feel it, but if you measure their autonomic nervous system, such as with heart rate variability, you'll see a great imbalance, and a sympathetic tension ultimately leads to many types of health conditions, such as high blood pressure and atrial fibrillation and things like that.
Okay. Wow. All right. So really the quality of the food that we're consuming every day is really our medicine. Is that a fair statement? I mean, it's medicine.
Well, food should be our medicine. Food should be a tool that we use to maintain our health and even restore our health. Though there's many other types of medicine.
Right.
So.
Okay. Something else that you mentioned a few times now is detoxify or toxins. When I think of a toxin, I think of a poison, I guess, something that just, it's like, don't drink that. That's a poison, right? It'll kill you. But as a medical doctor, when you say the word toxin or the need to detoxify, give us a good working understanding for the patients out there with cancer, what you're talking about when you talk about a toxin in the body that needs to be addressed.
Well, a toxin is anything that should not be in our body or cells. Anything that could interfere with our normal intracellular operational systems. For example, we could take fluoride. If you look at the periodic table of chemistry, you'll see in one row chlorine, fluoride, iodine. Now, iodine is essential to our cells more than just, it's so essential that we're created in such a way that the thyroid gland's number one purpose is to capture iodine and convert it into thyroid hormone. And when we talk about the two most common thyroid hormones, we have T3 and T4. Well, the numbers 3 and 4 refer to how many iodine molecules are in that particular hormone. So if you're intaking a great deal of chlorine or fluoride from the water supply, it can block the place of iodine at a cellular level. Well, that interferes with metabolism or metabolic cellular function. And there's always a consequence when you disrupt how we were designed to function.
Okay. So to restate that, a toxin would be anything that doesn't belong in the body that would be impairing the way it ought to be functioning. And this is really interesting what you just said, because you just mentioned water, and if water had, fluoride or some chemicals in it, that would come in and disrupt our thyroid gland, which needs iodine and to make the T3, T4 conversions and all that. And that's something so simple, water. I think, we're going to drink water. I know not everybody drinks, water every day and probably in the appropriate amounts, but nonetheless, that's a case for, again, the quality of the water that we drink, right? Just like the quality of the food that we're eating, we need to have good quality water. That's fascinating. Okay, so let's say, you have a patient, and I'm assuming you have some type of test or some type of labs that you run to measure toxicity in the body. To determine if what's in there. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There for many years, 30, 40, 50 years, there have been various tests available and more being developed where you can measure in blood or stool, urine, levels of chemicals, and even if not only chemicals but heavy metals such as mercury, aluminum, and lead. And often we'll be exposed to these items, and sometimes, and our bodies can handle a certain level. We have natural detoxification pathways in our cells, but they can also become overwhelmed if we are exposed to more than our bodies can handle. And so we can, and doing a blood test for a chemical is not always an accurate assessment of what's in your body, because sometimes these chemicals will get stored in different tissues. So, and it's one thing if you're working in a certain chemical factory, and then that level of a chemical or a toxin, you'll find in the bloodstream. But sometimes we have to challenge the body. For example, in the nature of lead or aluminum, it'll get stored in the body, in the bone marrow, or maybe in the kidneys, whereas the blood tests may be low. So we'll administer a chelating agent, which will bind these heavy metals and then pull it out of the body. So, for example, the gold standard for heavy metal testing traditionally has been a intravenous chelation challenge. You can also do it orally, but I do think, in my experience, the intravenous chelation challenge is more accurate. And when you administer these chelating or binding agents intravenously, they will grab hold of lead, aluminum, mercury, arsenic, pull them out through the urine. You collect the urine for 6 to 8 hours, and then that's sent to a lab for assessment and quantification. So it's a very accurate test to measure heavy metals. But again, there are many types of ways to measure different environmental toxins.
Okay. So chelation therapy, which is something that you administer, and again, just repeating it back for everyone listening, is an IV, and it binds, toxins get bound to it, and then the patient passes it in their urine. It's able to be measured to see what's come out of the body. Is that correct?
That's correct. And again, you can administer chelating agents intravenously, orally, topically, rectally. There are a number of ways to administer these detoxification chelating agents.
Okay. But through an IV would be, in your opinion, superior way of,
as far as, at least for the initial testing.
Okay.
But again, there are many ways to do it. But that is one way I think is very accurate.
Are these chelator therapies something that is provided, that may be prescribed to the patient on an ongoing basis in order to detoxify the body continuously?
Yes.
To get it?
After you receive the results from the laboratory assessment, if you have elevated levels of heavy metals, then some type of a chelation detoxification protocol could be implemented. Sometimes it can be partly intravenously, but it can also be done orally, topically, rectally, and a number of agents are very effective at removing these heavy metals.
And these would be, again, toxins, these heavy metals that would impair the energy of the cell, right? Am I correct?
That's correct.
So, and if you're a patient with cancer, that's a bad place to be. It's like, well, we have to dump these heavy metals or these toxins out of the body so that we get the cells full of life again, I guess. Is that?
Yes. And not only impair the energy, yes, that's on one level. If these heavy metals get into a cell and affect the mitochondrial energy factory, well, then you won't have the energy produced. But they can also interfere with other biochemical pathways such as enzymes, and then enzymes carry out so many functions in the body, or heavy metals might affect a receptor on the surface of a cell, so insulin can't properly connect to the receptor and allow blood sugar or glucose to go in the cell. So heavy metals and can affect the body on different levels, not just the production of energy.
How you mentioned enzymes a couple of times now. Explain to us the value of enzyme. Explain to us what an enzyme is and why we need it. And if you don't have enough enzymes, how that affects a cancer patient, right? What does that look like?
So an enzyme is a biochemical protein that has a metabolic function in helping to convert one biochemical molecule to another. So, for example, when blood sugar or glucose is processed within a cell, it goes through a series of many steps in that process to obtain energy from it. Well, each one of those steps is carried out by a unique enzyme. So it's a biochemical protein that carries out a particular function, and it's absolutely necessary for normal metabolism or energy function, or for a cell to carry out its functions, such as produce hormones such as testosterone, or for a white blood cell to be activated to work against a virus.
Okay. Where do these enzymes come from in our body? Is it an organ that's producing it? Is it food? How do we get an enzyme?
Thank you. Each cell of the body produces its own enzymes that work inside the cell or intracellularly. The DNA, the genes that are contained in each cell actually are copied, and they make different proteins and enzymes for that cell to function. Now, other enzymes, such as from the pancreas, they may be released systemically, and they'll work on a systemic level, not just to help us digest food. Pancreatic enzymes are also thought to work systemically to work against inflammation and things like that.
Okay. Are there foods that have enzymes that actually, like, can we eat?
Yes, all living foods, all foods have enzymes.
All foods.
Now, to the degree that you cook or process a food, you will deactivate some or all of those enzymes.
Okay.
But particularly raw food, fruits and vegetables provide an abundance of enzymes that are important for the body.
Does beef or chicken or any animal proteins, do they have enzymes?
Every cell in the world has enzymes in it.
Okay.
The enzymes are important into the intracellular processes of a cell.
Mm-hmm.
So every cell, even every bacteria has enzymes within that cell.
Okay. Okay. Got it. We've hit some important, points here. We've talked about the energy level of a cell, how that can become impaired, right? Through something as simple as eating the wrong food, but also how it could be improved through detoxification. And you just explained to us the value of enzymes as well and how that plays a role as well. At a cellular level, what other areas of the cell are important to address for a patient with cancer, right? Is that it, or is there other aspects of the cell that you look at as a physician?
I think you can look at it on a simple basis. It's what are the nutrients
mm-hmm.
that are needed, vitamins and minerals,
mm-hmm.
Antioxidants, enzymes. What molecules are needed for that cell to function? What molecule toxins are there that could block or interfere? That's I think the simplest way to look at it. But then you might even add a third internally. What are the genetics or the genomic abilities of the cell? Were there inherited weaknesses, or were there acquired genetic weaknesses from environmental toxins changing how the DNA is expressed?
Okay.
So, in more recently, in the area of genetics or genomics, it's giving us very important information that can help anyone working in the field of cancer or to treat cancer to raise the level of a cellular function.
Okay. What role, if any, does exercise play in the energy of the cell or the detoxification of the body? Does it play an important role? And if so, how so?
Excellent question. One of my favorite subjects, and we include that as part of every cancer protocol that we develop for patients. We call exercise, in a sense, oxygen therapy. Okay. Now, it's more than that.
Okay.
But and earlier when I mentioned the two basic aspects of cell function, what's missing, mm-hmm. or what's needed, mm-hmm. and what's there that shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. Oxygen is another molecule It's the most essential molecule in our life and body.
Okay.
And so exercise brings oxygen to the cells.
Okay.
And it's the number one nutrient to help produce ATP, our energy molecule.
It's the number one
Molecule.
So I just want to make sure I got you right. So what you're saying is that exercise is the number one.
Well, oxygen is
oxygen. And so, exercise because it requires oxygen delivery. It's the best way to get the ATP going in the cell. Am I hearing that right?
In a sense, yes.
Wow.
Now you can do simple exercise alone, and as you exercise and you increase your blood flow, you're going to deliver more oxygen to every cell.
Okay.
You can also use hyperbaric oxygen. You can also use a technique where you add supplemental oxygen to your exercise, and that's called exercise with oxygen therapy, or EWOT.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When it comes to the topic of exercise, I think about, I break it up into two compartments, I guess. There's strength training and there's cardiovascular training, lifting weights maybe versus running or aerobics or something of that nature. Is one better than the other? Are both needed? What does it look like for a cancer patient specifically, right? And again, I know that some of these things have to be individualized for the patient and the state that they find themselves in. But are there studies or is there evidence of one being more important than the other? What does that look like?
I'm not sure I can point to certain studies that have answered that question conclusively.
Mm-hmm.
So often in medical scientific research, there's an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
There's a goal to prove whatever someone's hypothesis was.
Okay.
And so often you can design a study to give you the results you want, or you can interpret data how you want. So the adage of following the science needs to be questioned often, but I think they're both important. And to your point, I think there needs to be a balance. And then it depends on what stage of cancer, what's the condition of the patient as far as what they can handle. But I think they're both absolutely essential to a metabolic cancer protocol.
Okay.
Because ultimately with cancer, you want to optimize metabolism on a cellular level, and you want to optimize immune function on a systemic level so that the immune system can recognize cancer cells and get rid of them, and the immune system can recognize pathogens such as viruses and parasites and also get rid of them or control them. Sometimes we can't get rid of every single amount of a virus. Sometimes we all have viruses living within us. The question is, what's the balance? What's the level of activity?
When I think about exercise and a cancer patient, the cancer patient that I'm thinking about in my mind right now is stage 4 cancer patient. They've already gone through conventional therapy. Their immune system's weakened. They're physically weakened. And, I'm speaking personally for myself, but I take pity on them as far as asking them, you need to do an exercise program, right? It's like, It's not within me. I'm like, how can I ask them to exercise? But that individual, do we need to ask them to exercise, even if it's just, hey, you need to just go out and walk for 15 minutes? Is it that important for their health?
Yes,
it is.
Yes, every person with cancer, no matter their stage, can do some type of physical movement. It may be walking. It may be on a stationary bike in only 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. It may be lifting, using 2-pound weights to do some strength training.
Right.
And they may need a physical therapist to help them do that.
Mm-hmm.
But every single patient should exercise to on the level that they could handle and would be beneficial. It's vital for every patient.
You specialize in you're an integrative cancer therapy specialist. That's what you do. So, and we're hearing that right now. You're integrating a lot of different things. Why isn't this part of the standard of care for a patient that gets a cancer diagnosis? When someone's diagnosed with cancer, the standard of care is generally going to be full dosages of chemotherapy or radiation or surgery, but you don't hear about, hey, you need to exercise, right? Or, hey, you need to change your diet. Metabolically, this is crucial. Because that's what's coming across this table right now. These are fundamental parts of the protocol. This has to be done. there's been a war on cancer now, I guess, for 50 years. It's been a while. Why isn't this just part of the conversation that this is part of the standard of care? You have to exercise and change your diet. Why isn't this happening?
I think I can address that from two aspects. One is there is a growing level of awareness that these things are important. They've been found in basic medical science for 50 years or even longer. And you'll see different cancer institutions across the world. They're starting to incorporate these things, and they have been over the years. But the major paradigm is not on metabolism, it's on the target is the cancer. Mm-hmm. Most of cancer medicine is, well, there's the cancer, where is it? And let's attack it. And so it's using, traditionally chemotherapy or radiation or surgery or the new targeted pharmaceuticals that are being approved in the last 10 or 20 years. And there's not, because that's just how the system operates. Okay. It's sort of a profit. That's what's approved. That's what gets reimbursed. But restorative metabolic medicine, there are no codes for that. There are no therapies that fit into the traditional oncology paradigm or at the big cancer institutions. They don't exercise patients. There's not enough room for them, so they don't have the mindset to do that.
Got it. Okay, so that's really the business of cancer. What medical insurance is going to pay for, and so that's what the oncologist is prescribing and all. But patient that's coming to you is coming for integrative care, and so there's a greater toolbox that's made available, and obviously a greater field of study, I suppose, as well.
I might say the cancer patient is looking for what's missing, or how can they take responsibility? When they usually go to a cancer center or an oncology office, they're just passive. They just lay on a table or they receive radiation, they put their arm out, they get their IV chemo, mm-hmm. but they're not very active in their overall treatment course. So they're asking, what can I do? How can I take responsibility? And they know after 50 years of the war on cancer, we know that we're not winning the war. Mm-hmm. We also know after many years, decades of scientific research, there's something about nutrients that are important. So when we think about the conventional standard of care of oncology therapy, it does have a place. It absolutely reduces tumor load. There's absolutely a place for it. The question is, or the issue is, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket. We have to use both sides, or I think you have to use an integrative protocol, mm-hmm. the best of standard of care and the best of metabolic immunotherapy.
Okay, got it. All right, so that's encouraging, because one thing that you just said is there is a growing awareness among physicians that, hey, we need to address the entire patient. And then there's cancer patients that are becoming aware of this as well, right? That, hey, we have to do better than just the standard of care. There's got to be something else I could do for my health and wellness in order to improve it. That's great. I love the way that, the way that sounds, right? That there is this growing awareness. But two things that have come out of this so far is the value of good quality food, and then oxygen, and how exercise is promoting that. Would it be a true statement that food and exercise are probably the two most important things that we could do at a cellular level for our own health and wellness, not just as a cancer patient, but just every American, every individual?
Yes. On a physical, cellular level, I can agree with that statement. Okay. I would also add, though, that a person's emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being is as vital or more important, because those things affect us on a cellular level.
Okay, so someone's watching this and they hear a medical doctor saying that, hey, your emotional, psychological, and spiritual condition also affects you at a cellular level. How so? How does how does that happen? Why does it happen?
Well, I wish you may have not asked me that question. It's a challenging question because science cannot study that very well.
Mm-hmm.
Science studies molecules, mostly biochemistry and biophysics, but how someone's psychological state of anxiety or depression, how that impacts the function of their immune system, or for example, the emotion of anger.
Mm.
We know just from experience and over thousands of years, anger affects the liver often. It's held there. So how do you prove that the liver's function is reduced? That's very difficult in a scientific setting to do that.
Okay. Yeah, but you bring up a good point. Anger, I think of ulcers, people that get ulcers. And I mean, at least I could think back to when I was younger, growing up, I had heard back then that anger or carrying a lot of stress could give you an ulcer, like it would make you sick. I would hear these kind of things. So that's an emotional connection, I guess, to the physical body. But I mean, we're human beings, right? And I know as a human being that when I experience a level of sadness, I just kind of get down. I'm not up. My energy level goes down,
Yes.
I suppose, is the best way. I'm not feeling, we say I'm not up to it right now. I don't feel like doing that. And I suppose in a very simplistic way, that's an emotional connection to the way my cells are responding. Is that a fair statement?
Remember this, every single aspect of who and what we are is interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to study, but it's always intimately connected.
Mm-hmm.
In the example of a stomach ulcer,
Mm-hmm.
often it's stress,
Mm-hmm.
excess stress that overwhelms us, and we become anxious, fearful. And depending on each person will carry that differently in their body,
Mm-hmm.
but often it's held in our stomach area and will weaken that system and weaken the lining of it. And then we start to have symptoms of burning or gastritis. And then if it gets worse, there's actually a hole or an ulcer in the stomach.
Okay. I get it. I could see what you're saying about emotional, psychological, spiritual.
And often I will use this example with cancer patients or anyone. I can't treat your immune system or try to activate it and improve its function if you are severely depressed or anxious. Or I might say it this way, a person who's really struggling with depression or anxiety or trauma in their life, that can be so overwhelming to their body, has such an effect that it weakens the immune system. And I don't necessarily have a therapy directed at the immune system that can overcome that process. You have to go to the root cause. You have to deal with that on an emotional, psychological, spiritual basis.
Okay. So what you're saying is the emotions, the psychological, the spiritual aspect of a person, if it's in a bad place, it could actually overwhelm any good that you're attempting to do for the patient.
It can overwhelm any good therapies, even diet. I mean, it's going to be helpful, but the severe depression or trauma can so overwhelm the body that having the best levels of vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc, even though that's helpful,
right,
a person can still develop some type of disease condition, including cancer.
That's powerful. That's a powerful statement that I can overwhelm it, right, with this negative vibe, we would say, right? It's this negativity. So I guess it's really important to be happy or to get individuals to a happier state of mind.
And I would say that earlier I used the term integrative medicine of maybe integrating standard of care with metabolic medicine, but really even a better word is holistic.
Okay.
We are body and soul. And so every every aspect of our beings and every process is all interconnected. Well, I think the challenge and the calling is for physicians and healthcare providers and nurses and medical assistants to all recognize that and work together as best as possible on every level. And that may include also pastors, spiritual counselors, health coaches, life coaches.
Okay. Got it. Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton? He had a book called, I think, The Biology of Belief.
Yes.
And it leans towards this basically, that the way that we think is influencing, even changing our DNA, I think is what he says, right? Based on some of the
I'm not sure I would say this, it affects our DNA.
It affects our DNA.
And in one sense, in one level, you can't change your DNA. On another level, you can affect or change how it operates or how it's expressed. And that's back to the earlier statement of epigenetics. Anything outside of your genes, any way you live or what you experience, all has some impact on your genes at some level.
Have you found in your practice with the patients with cancer that come to you that the diagnosis of their cancer sprung up after a traumatic event?
Very often that is true. And also, this was probably 25 or 30 years ago. I was working with a breast cancer patient, long distance, and she mentioned to me that being diagnosed with cancer was the best thing that ever happened to her. I didn't quite understand that statement. It took me a while, but it was a blessing to her. It was a wake-up call for her to take responsibility, to make some changes, not only in in every way, what she ate, how she lived, how she thought. She was now cherishing every moment with her grandchildren. Now, she was doing well, but she had stage 4 cancer. She was controlling it, but it gave her a completely different, it was an opportunity for her to look at life differently. And she also grew spiritually. So cancer can be a blessing.
It sounds like she started to value happiness in a whole new way. Okay.
Yes, value life and also to maybe define what is true happiness.
Okay. Got it. Wow. All right. And let me say one other thing. Some of our listeners will remember there's a proverb that says a merry heart does good like a medicine. So it's when our internal soul is merry and joyful and content, and we have a loving attitude towards our fellow man, our neighbor, and we have a loving attitude towards God. That's the only way to have a merry heart. And that's a medicine that can't easily be studied in our conventional Western paradigm of science. Yeah, and that's going to that again goes back to that's supporting our emotional, psychological, our spiritual state as human beings, and also that's good. I mean, for sure, I don't find any value in being upset or angry. As far as my general well-being, it makes me feel terrible. Right? I would rather be happy and be at peace with life on a day-to-day basis, and even with the environment and the situations that are going on in the world, I don't want it to pull me in and turn me into an angry person or a sad person. I don't see any health benefit from that. I see it destroying me and all.
Well, we have some psychological counseling advice given to us by the Apostle Paul when he says to the Ephesian church, he says, do not let the sun go down on your anger, or do not hold anger. And of course, he's, in a certain sense, talking about spiritually how that affects your life and the body life of the church. But on an individual, personal level, that will always have a consequence if it continues. And it also changes your metabolic function. Any strong emotion, if it's positive and it's full of joy and merriment, will enhance your function and your immune function. Any strong emotion on the negative side will bring down your overall metabolic function and cause imbalance in your nervous system. We talked about the autonomic nervous system, and therefore it'll also lower immune function. And you cannot maintain health. You cannot regain health. You cannot overcome the cancer with that type of strong negative emotions that you're harboring. And sometimes it's consciously, and sometimes it's on a subconscious level.
It sounds to me like the most powerful thing for good, or the most powerful thing for bad, I guess, is up here in my mind. Is that
Yes,
fair?
I would complement that, or balance, and say the mind and the heart,
Okay.
or the soul of a person. That capacity to know who you are as a created individual, and that you live before a creator. In a sense, I love the truth that says, in him we live and move and have our being. So our mind and soul need to remember that, and we need to live consistently with that and honor our creator and remember what our purpose or our calling is. That's the way we take care of our mind and our heart. That's the only way to truly be happy. And we could remember Solomon's words when he said, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter," which is to fear God, or to trust him and believe him or acknowledge him, and to keep his commandments.
It's good. That's good. That's a good word. Dr. Bergeron, one thing that's come across is that your belief in God, right? You're a doctor that has a deep faith, and that comes across in your practice. And so I want to talk about something that's outside of your practice that you do, I guess on a personal level. You organize the Faith and Medicine Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia, and all. What is the purpose behind that? Because this is the 5th year you're doing it, right? Coming up in January 31st of 2025. So we'll put a little plug in for this.
Thank you.
And but this is the 5th year that you're doing it, and it's not really, as I understand it, this is not a conference to educate cancer patients or patients in general about, here's some of the health and wellness stuff that's available. You're not selling anything to them. This has to do with a crossroads between how faith and medicine intersect. What is that conference about? How does it help the layperson?
Well, the truths that God has given us, revealed in his word, are the most important truths and principles of life. And they impact every part of life. I like to remember the phrase, all of the word of God for all of life. And so the purpose of this conference was to explore, what does God's word teach us about health, both from the individual person who's pursuing health or trying to preserve their health or restore it, and then what does the word of God, what principles does it give us for healthcare practitioners to be providers of care? So it's both for the layperson and the healthcare professional. And so we have a variety of physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners, pastors, biblical counselors, and other types of people who speak from their faith and help to apply the word of God to these different areas of health.
Okay.
It's not about therapies, though they may be mentioned as part of a presentation, but it's really about how can we grow from a truth standpoint, and how can we apply it, and help us to be have a better motivation and a better perspective on healthcare.
So it's really spiritual in nature. It's really, how do the members of the church that are in the healthcare arena help their patients spiritually, I guess, in order to promote good health and wellness?
But not only help them spiritually, but how can the healthcare provider understand that their faith, their calling, should include their own spiritual health? As we grow spiritually, as we mature, as we become more Christ-like, and filled with the Word of God and having our minds thinking God's thoughts after Him, how does that apply to how we think about healthcare and how do we approach our patients or clients? So it is a spiritual conference, but it's practical. And how can we grow and learn from it? And it's not just for healthcare providers; it's for also the public to also come.
Has that part of your life? Do you believe that's made you a more compassionate doctor?
Which part?
The spiritual dynamic to your life, your spiritual life, has that made you, do you believe, compared to maybe some of your contemporaries, made you have more compassion towards your patients?
It has. And I think maybe for a few reasons. One is because as we study the life of Christ, we see how compassionate he was. He gave his entire life to minister. He was always teaching, he was healing. Well, in a certain sense, those in healthcare should be always teaching and healing. Now we heal on a different level, a different way. It's so naturally any healthcare provider who believes in the Christian faith and is following Christ as the most important figure in history, and you might say if anyone has a personal hero, it should be Christ, and he's the model for how we think and how we live. And so it does, but we're also compassionate, not just on a physical level, but we're looking at each person holistically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically on every level. It should enable a healthcare provider to be more effective, more compassionate. Because we've discussed earlier, our metabolism is not just on a physical or biomolecular or a bioenergetic level. Everything is connected. Everything is interconnected. Everything affects another process. So if we're going to really be the best healthcare provider, we need to be holistic practitioners.
Okay.
Mind, body, and soul.
Okay. Because there's a diversity that makes up a human being.
Yes.
That needs to be united.
And as a healthcare practitioner, we're not going to be equally effective in each one of those areas, but we need to remember that as we approach our clients or patients and as we build their treatment strategies or protocols, we need to incorporate various types of people in that program to help us care for a patient.
What percentage of your patients that come to you are coming to you because they believe this is a spiritual doctor here, he's a religious man, and I feel more comfortable with this type of physician? Is there a good percentage of your patients that are coming to you because of this, or that just kind of happens organically and as they walk through the door? What does that look like?
I think I might estimate that maybe 80% of the new clients or patients that come to Real Health Medical are coming to us as a group because they do know of our Christian faith and they trust us. They think it's a starting place. They can trust someone with their health in their life.
Okay.
It's not it's not so much that we're sort of Christian pastors or ministers, but we're healthcare workers that have a strong faith and we're trying to live it out, and and generally because we're a word of mouth practice, the thinking is you can trust them to assess you properly. They have a reasonable amount of expertise in metabolic healthcare and a number of different tools, and they're going to honestly and carefully assess you and make recommendations and not take advantage of you.
Okay, got it. I know you've had your own practice for many years now, but you've been a doctor now for over 30 years, right? In your career, would you say that the majority of doctors are creationists, or would they be more atheistic in their belief?
In my experience, they are not openly creationist. Okay. I actually don't think they would claim to be atheist. Okay. But they would just prefer not to discuss the matter.
Okay.
They'd rather talk about metabolism or science or published articles or alternative therapies or something like that.
Okay.
Now there's a growing consensus out there that we are more than just physical, beings. And so there's a growing awareness in the integrative, functional alternative space of healthcare that you really have to treat more than just the body and biochemical pathways. So there's a growing acknowledgement of that, and that's obvious. We've known that for thousands of years.
Okay, great. That's great. That's really helpful because I know and I'm speaking about, some personal friends over the years when they've had to go to the doctor. I don't go to the doctor myself very often. I try to take care of my health and stay out of the doctor's office, quite frankly. But I have some friends and relatives that go see the doctor on occasion. And the feeling I get from the feeling that they give to me from their doctor visits is that the doctor is just kind of cold, right? Just not warm, right? Aside from the fact that the appointment is really short. So when I'm speaking with you right now about this, about your spiritual life, you're a Christian doctor, I get a whole different vibe, like that my doctor's appointment with Dr. Bergeron is going to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, a more loving appointment, right? More compassionate appointment, trying to get to the root cause of what's wrong, what's troubling my health, right? Whether it's emotional, spiritual, psychological, or metabolic, whatever the thing looks like, right? Is that what's happening in your office?
That's
the goal?
That's what we endeavor to accomplish.
All right.
But on the negative or the critical side, I might say, unfortunately, in much of healthcare, many healthcare providers, practitioners are not truly very happy in their work. It's sad because they're forced into a volume model with often very short visits. There's much greater concern about proper coding and then documentation to justify the coding, so the billing is submitted, so the reimbursement is obtained. That seems to be a vicious cycle, and more and more practitioners are just overworked, less satisfied, and that comes across in their interaction with patient care. So that, unfortunately, that's what goes on, and many Americans sense that in their own interaction with physicians in their offices, and so more and more Americans are looking outside of the traditional standard of care. And so in our office, new patients are generally an hour, if not longer, and unless it's a more of acute focused visit, such as acute, say, food poisoning. Well, we don't need an hour to address that. But generally for complex, ongoing health issues, we're going to spend a minimum of an hour with every new client.
Okay. Wow. All right. Fantastic.
And often our new clients will say that, and you listened. We're not sitting there the whole time documenting. We do have to document some things for all sorts of good reasons, some medical, legal, but just so we can remember a patient's history, and we can refer to it in the future. Or if the client moves from one practitioner in the office to another, we have succinct notes. But often patients are amazed that we listen, and because we believe them. Often in your training, sometimes you're told not to always believe patients. And sometimes it depends on the demographics, the situations you train in. But sometimes, people that are using recreational substances or drugs, they often may misstate how much they're using.
Okay.
And but often in our type of clientele, they're taking responsibility. They're extremely motivated, and they want to get well, and they want to be heard, and they're willing to make changes in their life. And we have to ask these questions, and we need a proper amount of time to hear the patient, hear the situation. For example, earlier we talked about environmental exposure.
Right.
So we'll ask, well, what type of work have you been involved in? Where were you raised? Were you on a farm? Did you drink well water? Did you go to the military and get inundated with vaccines? And then did you start to feel bad after that? So all those details are important, and you can't do that in just 6 minutes.
Right. Okay. It's great. One of the things that I know about your practice is you're outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and your goal as a physician is to serve the people of Georgia, right? Those in your vicinity. And I know privately we had a discussion where you view the relationship with your patient as local. In other words, you want to serve the patient that is within your miss, within your geographical miss. And you also mentioned that this goes for any patient across the country, that they need an integrative physician that's in their backyard or close to them that they could work with. Why is that in the case of cancer? Why is that more important than flying to a cancer destination, a cancer clinic, a destination maybe in some other part of the world to go get cancer care for 3 or 4 weeks? Why is having someone more local, why is that more important for overall health and wellness for the cancer patient?
Well, it's obvious a patient can greatly benefit from seeing an expert or a specialist for certain procedures or therapeutic protocols, such as going out of the country to a cancer clinic. Absolutely, you can benefit. But when you finish that program, you've still got a great deal of work to do. And you're going to be doing it at your home or in your home. Mm-hmm. And the most beneficial relationship is with some type of local provider usually. Now, in this day and age, we have telemedicine, and you can certainly benefit from the expertise, the guidance of someone, through long distance telemedicine visits. But in my opinion, my experience, you really need a local healthcare provider that can provide certain therapies that you could benefit from in your clinic or through even through home health nursing. And so often a physician in another state or another country can't always write orders for a home health nurse to go into your home because that physician's not licensed in that state. Mm-hmm. So I think the principle is, whether it's family, religion, politics, or healthcare, the best is when it's local.
Okay.
And so I think that's in the best interest of the patient, but also for the healthcare provider. It's challenging to take care of patients who live at long distances. I've had clients from different countries, and Hawaii and Canada and the Bahamas and South America, mm-hmm. but it's not easy to communicate. Mm-hmm. It's a different type of relationship, mm-hmm. as opposed to knowing someone in person. Okay. It's more rewarding in a sense when you get to be with someone in person, and there's a different experience. You can examine a patient. You can really get a better picture of their emotional health and their energy and all things like that.
Okay. So the numbers currently, and I think it's from the American Cancer Society, is that we will have 2 million newly diagnosed patients this year in 2024 with cancer. So it's about, I think it's either 54 to 5,600 individuals a day that are getting diagnosed. I don't know how many of those are coming out of the state of Georgia, but for those that are in the state of Georgia and they find Dr. Bergeron, this integrative cancer doctor in their backyard, and they decide to pick up the phone, set an appointment, and come in, explain to me, as that new patient coming in the door that has never had any kind of cancer care at all, but they just got diagnosed when they found you. They come in, what does a cancer therapy treatment program at your facility going to look like for them? Short-term, long-term? Give us a feel of what that patient could expect from yourself.
I'll mention 3 components. Initially, there's just the upfront assessment, mm-hmm. and that may happen over a course of a couple of weeks, primarily 2 different extended visits. We'll say that on week 1, there'll be a full day evaluation. We'll draw labs, and then we'll do the second part of that initial evaluation on week 3 or 4 when we have the results of those tests back. Mm-hmm. And then from that, we create roughly a 4-month sort of phase 1 protocol. And that's where we try to accomplish, correcting nutritional deficiencies or even just optimizing nutritional levels. For example, we could take a vitamin D, the reference range of normal is 30 to 100. Well, we want that level close to 100 and sometimes greater than. And so we can do that easily in a couple months. Also, we want to do our initial detoxification, lower chemical levels through sauna detoxification or lower heavy metals through sauna or chelation. We also want to start working on, are there emotional, traumatic, and spiritual triggers to their illness, things that might block them from responding to the various types of complementary cancer therapies that we are hearing about. And so we address all of that in an initial phase 1 4-month period of time. And then in that period of time, we also want to make sure we can start seeing, the cancer markers levels going down. Maybe their circulating tumor cell counts going down, or maybe there's there's a reduction of tumor size on a CAT scan. And during that 4 months, we'll also be, when needed, we'll be partnering with a local oncologist, whether a medical or a surgical oncologist or even radiation. There are definite cases where integrating both sides into a patient's care is very important. And then after that 4-month period of time, we kind of transition into what we call the maintenance phase. And that we'll call that up to a year. And that can be different. It's certainly going to be different for a phase 1 a stage 1 or stage 2 cancer patient versus a stage 3, stage 4. Mm-hmm. There are different, expectations and outcomes. But I do believe, as we talked earlier, the definition of success.
Yes.
I do believe that integrative metabolic medicine will help every single cancer patient. They will have a benefit. They will live better, and they will live longer. Now, in a certain sense, a protocol is a protocol, but it depends on the patient's compliance, their willingness, right, their family support, their belief system. Mm-hmm. During that initial 4 months, we spend a great deal of time educating the clients and giving them information to read and videos to watch to educate them. And we have a few health coaches that are working with them on a weekly basis to educate them. Because if they don't, in a sense, work towards becoming an expert or are very knowledgeable about their body and the triggers and the possible benefits of certain therapies, they're probably not going to really do well. They have to own it. We often tell patients, this is the marathon of their life. We're their coaches. We're not running it for them.
Right.
But we're important, and we consider ourselves as part of their team.
Right.
And we're not exclusive. We think there's a place for a medical oncologist and their pastor and their life coach. The whole team works together. Each one of us is probably important, has an important place to play, but the client or the patient has to run the race, has to do the work, make the changes, and they really need a support system at home. It's very, very important. It's very difficult for someone who's alone to make all these changes, and sometimes they may get discouraged. So it's really helpful when there's home family support.
Okay. So I want to summarize phase 1 when the patient first comes in. On week 1, there's going to be some evaluations, some labs, and then on week 3 or 4 thereabouts, you'll review the labs and put together that initial phase 1 protocol, which will last about 4 months or so. But during that phase, one of the things that is crucial, from what I'm hearing, is the education of the patient and their ability to take ownership of the changes, the lifestyle changes they're going to need to make, which is going to take a great deal of courage, and the commitments that they will make over a long period of time, right, in order to achieve success, which is really defined from your practice as living better and living longer. That's success. And within that phase 1, you're going to incorporate any other conventional professionals, whether they be oncologists or radiologists, into this protocol as well. And then after that first phase, you go into that maintenance phase, which may be the remainder of the year, et cetera. Is that a fair assessment of what?
That's a fair assessment, and I like to describe it as it's comprehensive,
Mm-hmm.
it's integrative,
Mm-hmm.
it's balanced, it's scientific, on all those levels, and I think that's a fair assessment. I have found that the patients who will integrate both sides of cancer therapy, standard of care and sort of alternative metabolic, they have the best results.
Okay.
Now, I do often use the analogy, all of these things are like a hand of cards, and you've got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, when to play the cards.
Mm-hmm.
And so often patients or clients look to myself to tell them when should I have chemotherapy, or when should I have low dose chemotherapy, or when should I have surgery? When's the right time? How do I get prepared for that surgery?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to know how to look at your options and when to utilize them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I often tell patients is that you want to be careful about standard of care oncology. It has an absolute valuable place in reducing disease and helping you to live longer, but it can also be very harmful and stressful and toxic to the body.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we'll say, let's make use of standard of care cancer therapy,
Mm-hmm.
but let's keep it to an essential minimum. What is really valuable to you and useful, and let's support the body and restore metabolism, optimize immune function through functional medicine or metabolic medicine, and that gives clients the best outcome.
Okay. And one thing you didn't mention regarding these levels of care that you're providing is that it's also local care. It's for the patient that's locally, to your practice and all. And because it's local, in that first phase, those first 4 months, approximately how many times is the patient coming in a week to see you?
It varies on the stage of their cancer and the intensity of their protocol, but it could be, once a month for a patient who has a very early cancer, say a breast cancer, and they have a small tumor and they're preparing for a lumpectomy, either before or after it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't require a great deal of in-clinic therapy. On the other hand, other patients may come 4 or 5 days a week for a more intensive protocol because they have either a later stage, a greater tumor load, or they may be coming from long distance and they're in the clinic for, say, 3 weeks, and we have to work hard every day to try to give them a certain amount of benefit. Okay. So it really varies. It's customized or it's personalized for each patient and their stage of cancer, and also their readiness. What's the patient looking for? We don't feel like we dictate to patients, this is what you're going to do, and we don't have a one size fits all. We try to customize it, personalize it for each patient and where they are in their and what they know and what they're ready to do, and even, of course, being considerate of their financial budget.
Okay, yeah. This is completely different than the standard of care, which I see as being more cookie cutter. Same thing for each patient, same thing for each patient. This is more individualized. So it's good to hear you say that. It's good for those viewing this that have a diagnosis of cancer to understand that as well when they come and they see you. So I want to discuss a topic because it's something that you mentioned earlier. You touched on it lightly, but I want to discuss it because you mentioned chemotherapy and there's a place for it. But you mentioned low-dose chemotherapy. And so low-dose chemotherapy is something that your center administers. What is low-dose chemotherapy, and why is this a valuable consideration for the patient to know about? Most individuals watching this are not going to be familiar with the idea of low-dose chemotherapy. What does that mean exactly? What is it? What is this?
And not familiar, and additionally, they may be somewhat alarmed that a holistic, integrative, functional, natural cancer doctor is using chemotherapy.
Right.
They might be alarmed And I understand that. But the idea of low-dose chemotherapy, or historically has been referred to as IPT, or insulin potentiated therapy, I believe started sometime about the 1960s with a physician in Mexico. And he would use lower dosages of 10, 15, 20%. And now, by the way, I'll say this. We know there's absolutely no doubt in the entire world that chemotherapy can effectively kill tumor cells and reduce tumor burden, shrink tumors. There's no question about that. And for a few cancers and a few small situations, chemotherapy actually might be curative, but that's a very small percentage of cancers. And so we all know since we started the war on cancer, chemotherapy shrinks disease, but it doesn't cure disease. We all know family and friends and neighbors who've been through chemotherapy, and a great percentage of them, a year or 2 or 5 years later, there's a recurrence. So chemotherapy did not cure them. Now, of course, those individuals didn't really make use of a metabolic comprehensive program. But back to the idea of low-dose chemo, it's extremely well tolerated. The side effect profile is just so greatly reduced. We have some patients who hardly have any side effects. It's just a fraction of what you might experience with standard, chemotherapy dosing. And then to make the low-dose chemotherapy more effective, we implemented, Dr. Ronaldo, I think, he added insulin, because the idea was cancer cells have 10 to 20 times more insulin receptors on their cells because their metabolism internally has changed. Their mitochondrial function to use sugar to make ATP, they've moved from an aerobic oxygen-based metabolism to an anaerobic metabolism. So they have to have 10 to 20 times more sugar, more glucose to meet their energy requirements. So cancer cells adapt by having more insulin receptors. So we can make use of that fact, use insulin to sort of open up those cancer cells and preferentially drive in the lower doses of chemotherapy. And so they can be just almost as effective as a standard dose. Now, there's a difference. Conventional standard chemotherapy would be given every 3 to 4 weeks, whereas low-dose chemotherapy, or IPT, is administered usually on a once a week, sometimes twice a week basis. So that's the basics of low-dose chemotherapy.
So you're introducing insulin into the body to a cancer cell that has more insulin receptors in order to carry the chemotherapy to that cell? Is that a
yes? The cell membranes are thought to be more open, ready to receive whatever's in the bloodstream.
Got it.
And it happens to be chemotherapy at the time.
Okay. So therefore, at a lower dose in this method of delivery, you would get excellent, I guess, kill of cancer cells.
You get an effective kill of cancer cells, and it's also, not only is the chemotherapy dose not as toxic or it's better tolerated, it's this lower dose is less suppressive of the immune system.
Okay.
You're also getting less tumor kill, so the body can even handle that process of detoxifying or metabolizing those dying cancer cells.
Okay.
So it's a smoother process over 2 or 3 months.
So in other words, you just said something really important. So as the cancer cells are dying and the tumor itself, in lay terms, is breaking down, the body's able to break down and remove the tumor, the dead tumor,
yes,
out of the body, whether it's through the urine, through the bowel movements, etc. And then I would think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you said doing this low dose delivery method, the immune system isn't as impaired, but you're going to come alongside and introduce immune boosting therapies to strengthen the immune system. Is that right during this process?
Yes. I would say we want to protect the rest of the body and the immune system because chemotherapy does have, certain effects that will weaken your metabolism and your immune function. So we want to support it. We're not necessarily doing immunotherapy at the same time. We're doing chemotherapy. I believe it's generally better. We want to support the immune system during low-dose chemotherapy, and when you're finished with low-dose chemotherapy and you've reduced your tumor load, and you've let's say you've eliminated 95% of your tumor burden. So now you have a small objective, and now your immune system can better handle that small load, and that's when you switch from a low-dose chemotherapy protocol to an immunotherapy protocol.
Okay.
Now, during low-dose chemotherapy, you can also complement that with other types of metabolic therapies, such as vitamin C, or IV artesunate, or artemisinin, and other types of therapies that will help. They're synergistic with the chemotherapy, but it's sort of a kill phase. It's a metabolic kill phase, and then I believe you then change your strategy to using your immune system, because ultimately it's your immune system that's going to keep the remaining tumor cells in check. So you're living well and you're living longer, or you even have the greatest possibility of actually no evidence of disease, or if we want to take it longer, remission.
Okay. So what I hear you saying in that initial phase is the approach is going to be metabolic to reduce the tumor load, kill cancer cells. And once the majority of that is completed over a period of time, then you will switch your protocol approach to go more towards an immunotherapy to support the immune system, so that by the grace of God, it's going to finish up the job in the body, so that we get to long-term health and wellness. And also, in the best scenarios, there's no evidence of disease in the future. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, that scenario we just discussed, that's certainly more applicable to the patient with stage 3 or stage 4 disease.
Okay.
That can be applied to stage 1 or 2, but in the earlier stages of cancer, you don't necessarily have to do low-dose chemotherapy. You could actually, with a smaller tumor load, you could do non-chemotherapy metabolic strategies that also kill tumor cells, but at the same time, since you're not suppressing the immune system a little bit with chemotherapy, you could implement immunotherapy early on.
Okay.
An example would be mistletoe, whether it's subcutaneous injections at home. We want to empower the client, the patient, to do therapies at home, but we can also do that intravenously. We can also inject tumors with mistletoe, and so that's another strategy that we can implement.
Immunotherapy. Define this or break it down for the layperson, because you hear this a lot on commercials for drugs now. Immunotherapy for cancer patients. Now, when I think of immunotherapy, just as a layperson, I think, okay, that's something that's going to make my immune system stronger to fight off a disease or an infection. I don't know if that's really by definition what it is, but what is immunotherapy for a cancer patient? Like, technically, what does that look like?
I'll mention 3 aspects of that. One, you just alluded to, you can utilize different natural food or plant herbal substances or extracts that can generally boost your immune function, your natural killer cell function.
Okay.
And there's great value in that. You can optimize your vitamin D and your zinc levels. So that's a generic support, and it is important. Number 2, you also mentioned or referenced the more well-known immunotherapy pharmaceutical drugs that we see popularized on TV. These agents usually just affect the body in one very targeted or specific pathway, and they can be helpful. But I think historically in the last 50 years, and what I'm referring to is immunotherapy can be done along the lines of you can make a specific tumor related immunotherapy where you are programming or activating a patient's dendritic stem cells. And then from that, those cells teach or train the rest of the immune system, the T cells and B cells, how to recognize that cancer. So that's a more specific type of immunotherapy, and it's really been around for decades. In fact, back in the 1980s, the John Wayne Cancer Center started working with melanoma patients, and they would create specific tumor vaccines out of the patient's surgical biopsy of their melanoma. And you could basically train their immune system to be more effective at recognizing cancer cells. In the 1990s, there was dendritic cell therapy was developed. My first utilization of that therapy was about 25 or 6 years ago. We had a young woman, she was probably in her mid-30s, with kidney cancer, and it was metastatic to her lungs, bones, and lymphatic system. And we did an integrative, comprehensive program where we used, in kidney cancer, interleukin-2 and interferon actually have a place. And also one thing, melanoma and kidney cancer are the most responsive, historically, they were the most responsive cancers to immunotherapy. They also didn't respond to chemotherapy very well. And so with this particular young woman, we utilized intravenous vitamin C, dietary changes. We tried to alkalinize her. We use low dosages of interleukin-2 because in the standard of care model, they usually will use high dose interleukin-2 or interferon, and those have great side effects. And often a patient has to be in the ICU, being monitored and those things. And we created a dendritic cell vaccine or immunotherapy for her. And then after about 8 months, her tumors were gone.
Wow.
On CT scan.
Wow. Okay.
So there's three different, there's general support of the immune system. There's a targeted support from a pharmaceutical drugs. And then there's more specific where we're using such as dendritic cell therapy.
Okay. You mentioned dendritic cell therapy quite a bit. Explain this to me in layman terms, to everyone watching. What is dendritic cell therapy? Because it sounds special.
So it is special because it's how we're designed, how we're created. And a dendritic cell is a type of white blood cell in our bodies that has the ability to recognize anything that's a threat. And then that could be an infection, it could be a tumor cell. And then its purpose is to hand off that information or train other cells in the body, such as your T cells and your B cells, so they will properly respond against the offending agent. And a B cell makes antibodies, and a T cell is a type of specific cell that will attack, whereas antibodies attach to an infection or a cancer cell, a T cell can actually attack the pathogen or the tumor cell. So dendritic cells help to train the rest of the immune system how to properly respond. And that can be done in a laboratory outside of the body by a blood sample. You can isolate a patient's white blood cells, their dendritic cells, their T cells, B cells, and in the laboratory, you can combine that with tumor-specific proteins or antigens. So you're giving the specific information of here's the target, we're programming those cells, and they're administered back to the patient intravenously.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat this back to you to make sure I got it right because it's pretty fascinating. So a dendritic cell is a type of white blood cell that is identifying threats in the human body, attacks, enemies in the body. But the dendritic cell trains other cells in the body on how to fight those invaders, those threats. And through a particular process, you could withdraw blood to isolate the dendritic cells of the body in order to introduce that or reintroduce that into the body to fight?
Yes, to then internally train the other white blood cells in the body, the T cells and the B cells,
right,
how to recognize the cancer cell target or the infection, and then work against it. Cancer, sometimes the body doesn't do that well on its own because it's toxic or deficient or traumatized by emotion.
Okay.
And often cancer cells will depress the immune system and weaken its ability to do that.
Okay. Got it. Fascinating.
So remember earlier, just if someone's immune system is suppressed because of emotional trauma or stress,
right,
their immune system may not respond well to anything you give them.
Right.
So you have to treat holistically. You have to help them resolve stress and trauma so they'll get the best response to these types of therapies.
Since the dendritic cell is a type of white cell, I'm assuming that I guess there's billions of white cells in our body. I don't know how many white cells are.
Well, we said earlier there are about 1 trillion white blood cells, and a certain fraction of them are dendritic cells.
Okay, so there is a percentage that's a dendritic cell. So those dendritic cells are our friends. I mean, this is a good guy.
Well, every white blood cell is a friend.
Good, right.
And they each, it's such as a college football team. Every person on that offensive line is really important. Any weak position, and you can lose the game.
Is there something that we can do for ourselves to improve our white blood cells in our body, to improve the quality of our white blood cells? Is there something?
Yes, and we addressed that earlier. We can determine what nutrients are not optimal or deficient. So let's optimize those.
Okay.
And then in particular, we can just allude to zinc, the mineral zinc and the vitamin D. We can certainly include vitamin A and vitamin C. And we can also detoxify the body. If we identify toxins, chemicals, or heavy metals that are pulling and weakening the immune system down, well, you might take all the zinc you want. You might achieve a perfect level of zinc, and it does help the immune system, but it never comes up to what it should be because you've got, formaldehyde and glyphosate and mercury that are pulling the immune system down. So we can do those two things. And then thirdly, you can generally support the body with various plant-based natural extracts, whether it's, echinacea or beta-glucan or zinc or vitamin D, all these things, mushrooms, cordyceps, maitake mushroom, all these things help to support the immune system.
Wow. Okay. It's fantastic.
And then let me just add one last thing. There is, in many cancer scenarios, there is a component where infections are driving that cancer. They may have been the trigger, or they may have been a second and tertiary dynamic. And so chronic low-grade viruses such as Epstein-Barr or low-grade spirochete Lyme-like infections, or maybe even parasites or mycoplasma is an intracellular bacteria. Those things weaken cells, their metabolism, and they weaken your immune function. So those things need to be addressed also to strengthen your immune system.
Fascinating. And obviously it's individualized per patient, per diagnosis. It's going to vary. And this is why they need a professional physician to come alongside them. It sounds like it can get complex, but yet at the same time, it seems very hopeful to me, that with working with a doctor like yourself, that the patient will be able to get to the bottom of what has really been happening to them in order to clean it up and to start the recovery process, is what I'm saying here. Is that right?
Yeah. We are amazingly complex. Another way of saying that is we're fearfully and wonderfully made.
Right.
But I would also say that given the capacity that God's given mankind in general, we understand a great deal about the human body. And then taking that knowledge and using it to improve health, that's the wisdom. That's the application of the knowledge.
Right.
It is complex, but on the other hand, it's perfectly ordered as God designed.
Right.
And so we can create a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it sometimes can be overwhelming for a patient client, but that's why up front we are adamant on providing educational materials and walking them through the process. They can't be passive and win.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right.
They can't be passive and win.
Right.
They have to be, sometimes I think about Michael Phelps.
Mm-hmm.
He knew his sport. He knew his body.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the pool.
Mm-hmm.
He knew how lane 4 different from lane 8,
mm-hmm.
the drag of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Everything mattered. And so we try to encourage clients that this is their race. This is their Olympic trial or their Olympic event. And you can do well. You can place,
Right. Right. Yeah. It reminds me of, the scripture in James that faith without works is dead. And so really this type of healthcare for a patient with cancer is about educating them well so that they could put their faith in it, really.
Yes.
And like, oh, okay, this is the why, this is how and why. And then they can get to work.
They can work out their faith.
Right. They can work out their faith and they can work out their whole healthcare journey as they're going down this road. So this is encouraging, and it definitely looks completely different than the standard of care where I'm just kind of passive, receiving an IV, et cetera.
And since you mentioned faith, I would say this. As a healthcare practitioner, as a physician,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really want patients looking to you as the great healer. God's the great healer. Jesus Christ is the great physician. And through healthcare providers, I believe Jesus Christ is working to heal.
Mm.
So when it comes to faith, we want to encourage the patient. We want to increase their faith in what God's created and what God's given, and not be looking to doctors to be the healer. We're just instruments. We're tools. We're fallible. We're limited. But as a team, and the patient's at a much better place when their hope is in the great things of God. They have a better perspective of this life, how short it is, their health. Because even if we achieve a remission,
Mm-hmm.
well, they still might die. We're going to die eventually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We want to live as long as we can, as well as we can on this earth, to build God's kingdom and enjoy the things He's given us, enjoy our families,
Mm-hmm.
but we still have to have an eternal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, since you brought up faith, I would say I think it's important that healthcare providers in some way encourage their patient clients to develop their faith, and different offices will have that ability,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's sending that patient to their local spiritual leader, their pastor,
Mm-hmm.
anyone who can encourage them and support them in the journey.
What a breath of fresh air. Everything that you just said is a breath of fresh air. When I compare it to the way that we think about doctors most of the time, where we walk into an office and there's a doctor with a lab coat on, and I'm thinking, this guy's going to heal me. He's going to have the answer. But the reality of what you said is that you're all part of a team. God is really the healer. And there's all these substances, on the planet, these protocols, and with the appropriate amount of wisdom and discovery, and being able to prescribe something to the patient, right, that the patient believes in and understands and puts their faith and gets to work on, that then some extraordinary healing, could take place, or maybe even a miraculous healing. And so that's a breath of fresh air, just to kind of hear it from a medical doctor, right?
Well, when a health condition is simple, there's only one trigger, such as a copper deficiency. Mm. And a practitioner thinks about it, tests for it, corrects it. That's an example of a fairly, straightforward problem to address and help restore someone's health. Mm-hmm. But there are other conditions that are really complex. Mm-hmm. And as a physician, I travel often to different cancer conferences. And what's encouraging in this functional metabolic cancer area or space mm-hmm. is that I see a lot of my colleagues, they are pursuing knowledge and wisdom, and they're sharing ideas all for the right reason. They're working tenaciously to understand. Nobody has all the answers. There are different cancer strategy, philosophies, clinics all across the world. They're all a little bit different. Not any one of them has all the answers. Because because every patient is a very complex person. Remember, there's spiritual, emotional. There's a social dynamic, and then there's a biological cancer process. And so, encouraging in my field of work to attend these conferences and see how adamant, how committed these types of practitioners are. For themselves to help their patients, but they're also sharing their wisdom with other practitioners.
That's fantastic. That's so encouraging. It sounds like very hopeful, It's like,
well, it's what it should be.
Yeah. I mean, I want more doctors like that in the world, quite frankly, they're challenging themselves. They want to learn and they want to discover. And I mean, that's
well, if we remember, mankind is just one mankind. We're connected. On another sense, if we take the church, the body of Christ, we're connected. So we're meant to operate. We're meant to be interconnected. We're meant to share. And so if we're not doing that, that's a self-centeredness. It's an egotistical, position that you're the only thing that matters. And you become more, as a practitioner, your practice and your reputation, that becomes more important than the patient's.
Okay. Good point. Thanks. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Bergeron, so thinking once again about the new patient that's coming to your center, to Real Health Medical. So this cancer patient is going to come in, he's going to get into the first phase of treatment and all. Just approximately, how many different therapies are they going to be exposed to in this integrative setting, right? Because in conventional care, it's typically, one or two, chemo, radiation, or surgery. But in your center, it's going to be different. So how many different types of therapies, what does it look like, right?
Well, of course, each type and stage of cancer will maybe require or dictate a different, type of treatment protocol and a different number of therapies. Also, the patient, the client's own understanding of these therapies and their willingness or their interest to do them. But could say some categories. There's going to be nutritional therapy in three forms. It's going to be dietary, it's going to be supplemental, and it's going to be intravenous.
Okay.
Then there's going to be detoxification.
Okay.
That could look like infrared sauna therapy at home. It could be detoxification enemas at home. It could be intravenous chelation for heavy metals. It could be oral detoxification supplements or binders for mold toxins or chemicals, and various supplements to support the liver metabolism, phase 1, phase 2 detoxification pathways. Another category of therapy would, of course, be immunotherapy. And again, we've talked about using, you can use food as medicine. You can use, for example, supplements. We talked about earlier. You can use intravenous, for example, mistletoe or vitamin C. You can do injections of mistletoe or immune hormones such as interleukin-2 or GM-CSF or immune peptides like thymosin alpha. So immunotherapy. We're also going to do other types of detoxification such as lymphatic therapy. We also will make use of bioenergetic therapy. That might be, so we're addressing the energy centers and meridians of the body. So we might use different types of biofeedback therapy or cold laser light therapy or acupuncture working on meridians. Energy's got to flow. If you have an energy block, it can be just as detrimental as a pathway block in a cell. We talked about metabolism being blocked. Well, energy is part of our metabolism. So, and then there's going to be metabolic therapies, and that's a big catch-all. But oxygen, remember, it's the number one molecule of the body, so it's going to raise metabolism. We can do other types of bioenergetic therapies that bring charge to the body, that put electrons in the body, such as a pulsed electromagnetic field, or we might give redox signaling molecules. So there's a host of therapies that might apply, but again, we've got to educate the patient. We've got to get their buy-in, their faith that these things are valuable, they have a place, and we have to also put it in the budget. What is the most cost-effective way to support this client as they're going through either conventional therapy or the most cost-effective way to treat this patient if they elect that most of what they're going to do is going to be from a non-conventional, treatment standpoint.
Okay, fantastic. It sounds like a buffet of healthcare that's available.
Yeah,
it's good for you, right?
It's not a la carte so much, but on the other hand, we're not dictating.
Okay.
We're trying to work with the patient client to build a program for them that's sustainable, that has a long-term outlook to it.
Right. It's fantastic. It's great. One of the things you spoke about earlier was CTC testing, circulating tumor cell testing. Can you discuss that just a little bit more, the value of that and what its purpose is?
Yes. So as the name states, we're assessing in the blood the level, the amount of circulating tumor cells. These cells break off of the primary or original site of cancer, or they break off of metastatic sites, and you can assess the number of cells. And probably at least 15 years ago, this technology began to be available, and it's shown to correlate very well with longevity or recurrence of disease. And so it's often, but not always, often better than standard tumor markers, such as a CEA level for colon cancer. Now, those conventional standard tumor markers I find very valuable, especially if you use them in the sense of what's the trend. For example, and we're going to come back to CTCs, but for a CEA, the normal range is, say, 0 to 5. But just because a patient's level is 2.8 doesn't mean they're cancer-free. They may have had surgery, their CEA level is 2.8. You repeat it 3 months, it's 3.8. You repeat it 3 months, it's 4.8. Well, it's all normal, under 5. But that's a disturbing trend. So that's the proper way to use those standard tumor markers. Look at the trend, not just if it's in the normal range.
Okay.
But back to CTC, they will often be more accurate, more sensitive at telling you the level of disease. Because really, ideally, we don't want any cancer cells, any circulating tumor cells in the blood. But you can also, though, live a long time and live well with a low level of CT cells in the blood, especially if your immune system is keeping things in check. And if your other metabolic therapies, and that could be supplemental, that could be intravenous vitamin C, for example, you can keep cancer in check. A win or a success is not always having a 0 CTC count or no evidence of tumor on your CAT scan. I've known patients, for example, I had a breast cancer patient who came to me more than 20 years ago. At that point, she came for that tumor vaccine I was working with, and she had had breast cancer for 18 years. Her only disease was 2 lymph nodes in her neck. And her stress level and her dietary intake would often change these lymph nodes, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller. And that's where I started to think about what is success. It's not just being no evidence of disease that you can find on a CAT scan. But back to circulating tumor cell counts, they're very helpful. They're very accurate. They're not 100%, but they're sensitive. And the real value is after whatever protocol you've been through, standard of care, surgery, chemo, radiation, alternative, low-dose chemo, that if that level's trending upward, we know there's a little bit more cancer activity, and it helps the physician and the client to know, okay, we need to push this up to another gear, because you can't just rely on your tumor markers or your PET scan not being active. You still can have quite a number of tumor cells in your bloodstream. So it's a very, very valuable test, and more oncologists are actually starting to adopt this.
Oh, okay. Okay. So this circulating tumor cell test, it works on a numerical scale?
It does.
And so if it's numerical, like what's a good number, I guess?
Well, it sort of depends on it really depends on the particular lab vendor, because they have different methods that they're assessing this by. So it's sort of apples and oranges, but let's just say the obvious is the lower the better, or a stable trend. You might have a level of 5. As long as it stays 5, that's a win. Now we'd like it to go down, but I tell them we can't always force every person to have a 0.
Okay.
Everyone's unique, and
all right, it's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question, just regarding the general population. I'm not even thinking cancer patient anymore here, right? This is just a freebie for anyone else listening to this. What are just some good blood labs that we should get done on ourselves? I don't know if it's annually or biannually, that we should look at just to take a comprehensive look at what's taking place inside of us, right? Give us your opinion.
That's a wonderful question. And I think that's one of the questions, really, we're seeing patients asking these questions. They're asking the same question. And so it's really not a long list, but I would say, and this is not in any particular order, but vitamin D level, the range is 30 to 100. For the average person, I might say a level of 60. Okay. But if you have significant other health challenges, autoimmune diseases, cancer, 80, 90, 100, even 120, those levels are very protective, and they're activating your immune system. So vitamin D, zinc. So vitamin D, I would say, is the number one vitamin to assess. Zinc is the number one mineral to assess from a protective standpoint. Now, we know that every nutrient, every vitamin, mineral is essential to how we're made. Next, I would probably say a ferritin level. Now, ferritin is known in medicine as an iron marker, but it's also an inflammatory marker. So if the level of ferritin, what's accepted is, say, 50 to 250, we want a level between 50 and 100. Because in all of life, and particularly cancer, we don't want excess iron. Iron is a driver of cancer. So is copper. So we don't want to be low, but we want to be on the lower end of that normal range for copper and iron. So ferritin would be important. I would also say we ought to check something related to B12. Another way to look at that is something called homocysteine. And both of those are going to impact the process of methylation. And B12 and methylation help protect, they activate they're very important as far as our metabolism being optimized, but methylation is also very important at stabilizing our DNA and our genes. When genes aren't stable, they can be overly expressed in a cancerous, out of control standpoint. So, and of course, when you have a low, for example, the range of B12 is, say, 300 to 1200. I like that level to be 1200. Or 1000 or 1200. If you have a low level of B12, then you can have lower metabolism, less energy. Your immune system's fatigued. You can't think well. You have every part of your body will not function optimally. Well, that's going to be a risk factor for disease and degeneration. And so, for example, you might develop dementia or cognitive decline just because your B12 levels are low. Okay. And B12 levels tend to be low when people are on long-term anti-acid and reflux medications. So if someone's on any of those medications, it's essential they check their B12 and their homocysteine levels. Okay. Other tests would be, other markers of inflammation would be a C-reactive protein. And specifically, there's something called a highly sensitive C-reactive protein. And because, again, and another test related to that is called a SED rate, or a ESR. And both of those, when they're elevated, they're reflecting inflammation in the body. And inflammation is sort of the bottom line foundation of all disease. That's how things get damaged or we lose function. So we want to look at ferritin, C-reactive protein, sed rate as your basic inflammatory markers. Now, there's some other ones that are easily obtainable, but your local family physician will order all of these. If you ask them for an interleukin-6 or an interleukin-1 level, that may be crossing the limit, because when you're in a primary care as a provider and you're billing insurance, the physician has to justify what they're ordering for insurance to cover it. And a lot of these physicians, they won't even know what interleukin-6 is or what to do with it, so they can't justify it. And so sometimes the patients will just go on their own to a walk-in lab or anylab.com and order their own blood test.
Okay, got it.
So those are some of the basic markers, I would say, from a cancer screening, especially since we've had COVID, the virus and the vaccines, I do believe we're seeing an increased level of cancer. And I also think we're seeing more aggressive cancers. And so I think for anyone who had a serious case of COVID or who received vaccines or who's been under serious stress and trauma, I think yearly cancer screening is reasonable. And for example, for men, we check a PSA for the prostate. We also could check a CEA, which reflects colon, stomach, lung, liver, and esophageal cancer. And then for women, we would certainly disregard the PSA, but we would check a CEA. We might check a very important marker as a CA-125, which is specific for ovarian cancer and female-related, pelvic cancers, because with ovarian cancer, these small ovaries are in a large space, and when they turn cancer, there's no symptom. It's only when they get to be really large, they're 10 centimeters, that finally a woman says, "Oh, I have pain," or "I'm bloating."
Okay. And
then she goes in for some kind of exam. They see this large tumor, and when you have a really large ovarian cancer that size, that's you can treat it, but it's a very difficult journey to cure that. So doing a CA-125 level every year, you get your baseline, and the range of normals say 0 to 38. Well, if you're always at a 10, and all of a sudden one day you're at 26, we need to ask what's changed.
Right.
Is it a cyst? Is it infection? Is it cancer? So then we can go to that ovarian ultrasound, find it early, surgically remove it, and you're cured.
Got it.
To a degree.
Right.
Still have to sometimes look at circulating tumor cells, but so those are some of the basic tests that I think would be important.
Okay, great to know. So one of the things that we like to do on the Cancer Doctor podcast is have one of our previous guests ask a question of our next guest. And so I have a question for you that has been asked by a past guest. So Dr. Bergeron, if somebody gave you $1 million to spend on medical research, how would you use that $1 million?
Well, what I might answer is we've had 60 years and hundreds of billions of dollars on good cancer research. As I mentioned earlier, we know a great deal. I'm not sure we need a lot more invested in the science of cancer. I think we need actually better access, better care, integrative, comprehensive metabolic care for cancer patients. But I guess I might say two areas. One in the area of cancer genomics, which again, there's a great deal of research that's going on, but I also would say in the area of infections, how they impact cancer. This is an old subject, and 30 years ago, there was a great deal of interest in it. But because there's really almost no way to pharmaceutically treat these infections, these viruses. It's never part of the standard of care oncology treatment programs. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of forgotten. And I think it's one reason why we're not winning the war on cancer is we're not addressing all the triggers. So I would suggest we put money into assessing infections. And again, the research has been there for decades. We know these infections exist. We have the technology, the tools, but we're just not utilizing it. There's been a block. It's like it's been boycotted. What I also might say is that I would take that money and go and not so much do basic science research. I would go ahead and follow 1,000 cancer patients that are treated from an integrative, metabolic, comprehensive perspective, including some standard of care. Follow those patients, allow them to have almost any therapy that we feel is beneficial, and then compare those results to the last 30 years of standard of care. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a worthy research project.
Yeah, those results would be interesting to see. All right. Fantastic. Dr. Rhett Bergeron, I want to thank you for coming into the studio today. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure that everyone watching this and listening to this, the patients themselves have learned a great deal as well. I want to let everybody know that's watching this, if you want to get in touch with Dr. Bergeron, and if you're in the local Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, Georgia area, that you can find them at realhealthmedical.com. That's realhealthmedical.com. And you can also contact them at their Roswell, Georgia office at area code 678-990-5401. Or if you want to telephone their Stockbridge, Georgia location, that telephone number is 770-756-1974. Again, thanks a bunch for coming in, Dr. Bergeron.
Well, thank you. As I said earlier, it is a privilege and it's been encouraging. And my heart is that this conversation will be a blessing. I look at it as a ministry. And thank you again.
All right. Appreciate it.